I grew up on the west side of Chicago. My mother died when I was 6 months old. I was put into the care of my grandmother, and my grandmother would bring men home from the bar and her drinking partners, and she would get intoxicated and drunk, and they would do things to me. It started at the early age of 4 or 5 years old.
It's a horrible thing. I was just going to ask you what effect it had on you as a young child. How did you cope with it?
It made me very frightened. It made me disconnect from school. I was a very smart kid, and to think back now, I dealt with it amazingly well because I made it through. A lot of kids don't make it through. But by the time where I was 9 years old, we had moved to an area where prostitutes worked in front of our building, and they were shiny. And when I was a little girl, all I ever wanted to do was be shiny.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second, but I gather, Brenda, that you had 2 children by the time you were the age of 14.
Yes. I was the kind of girl in the community that had no self-esteem. I didn't know how to say no. If you told me that you liked me or you loved me or you treated me nice, the little boys could basically have their way with me. So I had 2 children by boys in the community.
Didn't adults come around and ask what had happened and how you'd become pregnant?
And that was kind of the norm in my community. Young girls were having babies at that time.
And what happened to those babies?
My daughters?
Yes.
My daughters grew up to be awesome young ladies.
But who looked after them?
One is a doctor,
Yeah.
and one is in criminal justice. My aunt, I had an auntie named Aunt Josie, and she lived in the suburbs. She had a home, and she could give them a very decent life, and she did.
So you said that you looked at these prostitutes and you wanted to be shiny. Did you know what they were doing and what it involved?
I had no idea. They looked like Diana Ross and the Supremes. They had the shiny dresses on and the hair, and I wanted to be Diana Ross and all the Supremes, you know. So these women, I didn't know the pain. I didn't know anything that they were going to. I remember asking my grandmother, what were those women doing? And she said, those women take their panties off and men give them money. And I remember saying, I'll probably do that.
And when did it become a profession for you? What age were you?
I was 14 years old. There was no money in the house. There was no food in the house. And my grandmother had already told me that I needed to get some money and provide for that household. And I remember knowing a young lady that prostituted, and she had a pimp. And in that time, the idols in the neighborhood, the people that we looked up to were pimps, prostitutes. And I asked her, where did she go when she went and got her money? And she told me. And I did. I went down to Clark and Division here in Chicago and stood on the corner in front of the Mark Twain Hotel. And I was 14 years old, and I cried through everything that night. And when I did, the men knew that I was a younger, and they gave me more money. I went every weekend because it seemed like when I brought the money home that my grandmother was happy with me.
And you stayed in prostitution for something like 25 years. You must have come across some terrible and violent situations during that time.
I can tell you that when people describe prostitution as being something like the story of Pretty Woman or anything like that, it's nothing close to it. There's so much violence, okay? I've been shot 5 times. I've been stabbed over 13 times. The guys that come to pick up prostitutes are not doing it to make them their girlfriends. Trust that.
And was there any time when you thought you saw a way out, when you thought, I could have given this up, I could have stopped if only I'd taken that turn?
Through my whole 25 years, I never saw a way out. Because you begin to be brainwashed. You begin to feel like you are exactly what you're doing. People look at prostitutes and they turn their nose up and they look at you as if you smell. So I never thought that I would ever get out of prostitution. And at the end of my road, the only way that I got out was through being severely disfigured. My last customer drugged me 6 blocks with his car and tore all the skin off my face and the side of my body. I don't think, who knows what would have happened if that hadn't happened.
And why was that such a turning point for you? Because you didn't have the attractiveness anymore to attract the tricks on the street?
That was a part of it, and I remember going to the county hospital here in Chicago, and a police officer looked in because they called the police because of the condition I was in, and he said, "Oh, I know her. She's just a hooker." She probably beat some guy and took his money and got what she deserved. And I could hear the nurse laugh with him. And they pushed me back out into the waiting room as if I wasn't worth anything, as if I didn't even deserve the services of the emergency room. And while I was sitting in that waiting room, I began to think. I began to think about everything in my life. And I remember at that time looking up and saying to God to help me, because at that time I had no more ideas. I had no more bright ideas. I always had an idea, but I didn't have one at that time.
And did help come? I mean, you moved, I think, into a refuge for prostitutes.
Well, let me say, after I did that, God worked real fast. A doctor came and took care of me, and she asked me to go see social services in the hospital. Now, what I know about social services is they're not very social, But I did, and I was given a bus pass to go to a place called Genesis House, which was ran by an awesome woman named Edwina Gately. She helped me turn my life around.
What was it that enabled you not to go back to life on the street?
They made me feel at home. They made me feel welcome. And then they nurtured me. They treated me as if I was their very own, as if I belonged there. I hadn't been to a place in years that I felt like I belonged. I didn't have to worry about a job. I didn't have to worry about were they going to put me out before I got healed. They told me that they were not, that I could stay until I got better. And that's what happened. My face healed, my soul healed, my body healed there.
And you then went on to start an organization to try to help other young girls who might be at risk of sexual exploitation. Why did you want to give it back?
Well, not in the beginning. All I wanted to do was get a job and be normal, and not have the label of being a prostitute. So in the beginning, I went back and I volunteered. And I started to realize that nobody's going back and saying, this is who I was, that's where I was, and this is what happened. Usually when a woman gets out of prostitution, they don't talk about it. There's nothing that they want to tell people, what man will accept them as a wife? What person will hire them in their employment? Nobody. So the courage to do that was very strong for me. I really didn't care about what people thought.
Why? Where did that courage come from?
You know what? Sometimes in your life you find out what your purpose is. My purpose was to go back and help other women, because everything that happened to me in my life led up to what I'm doing today, to help other women.
Well, now, Brenda, we can hear a clip of you actually going into a school and talking to the young girls there, telling your story and giving them the message that you like to get across. Let's hear that clip now.
I got molested most of my life. It became normal for me. The molestation was horrible. But the most other horrible part is the people who didn't believe me when I told them. Yes. So it made me feel that I was dealing with that alone, and that in some way it was my fault. But I'm here to tell each and every one of you today, it is not your fault. Do you understand me? It is not your fault. 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 Do you understand me? That is not your fault.
I wonder what's the response from the girls that you meet when you go into a classroom like that?
Wow. You know what? First of all, people think that I just walked in the door and girls started to pour out their hearts and tell me about this. It took me almost 2 years to get the trust from those young ladies, and then for them to trust each other, for us to have conversations like that. And they understood that I had already been through what they were going through, and we were trying to get to the same place of healing. So they trusted me.
And why did you call it the Dreamcatcher Foundation?
Well, the symbolization of the Dreamcatcher is Native Indian, where the Dreamcatcher is supposed to chase away the nightmares of children, right? We want to chase away those bad dreams, those bad things that happen to women.
Do you find it depressing that you are still seeing young women who are going through the same horrific experiences that you had as a child?
I get angry. I think it's unbelievable that we're where we are today in our society, in America. We haven't noticed, or we don't realize that there is human trafficking going on right under our noses. people are turning their heads to those things, and kids don't want to talk about it because they're shame and they think it's their fault. And all it takes is someone to believe in them so that they don't hold the damage for the rest of their lives.
Now, you said earlier on that women who'd been in prostitution don't like to talk about it because it damages their employment prospects, it damages their prospects of finding a partner. But you have a husband. I wonder how you met your husband.
Well, I just happened to meet an extraordinary guy, you know. I was very picky. I mean, my husband said that I asked him more questions than parole board. You know, I realized,
after all those terrible experiences with men, I'm not surprised you asked him a lot of questions. You know, what did you want to know about him?
I had been on a healing and an abstinence for like 3 years before I met my husband because I had so much damage going on with myself. And I just met him at the right time, and he didn't judge me for any of my things that had happened before he met me. All he saw was, he said, the girl with the pretty smile, and that he wanted to be a part of my life, and I definitely wanted to be a part of his. And we celebrated 10 years last year of marriage, and he's downstairs waiting for me right now.
Well, congratulations.
He supports me everything I do.
That's fantastic. And I suppose what your story tells above all to these women who you're talking to, young girls that you're talking to, is that there is hope, that you can turn your life around.
Yes, there's life. There's life after so much damage. There's life after so much trauma. And I'm not just talking about regular life. There's a lot of life. I tell my girls that the sky is the limit. So far, we have graduated over 13 girls from high school and now are in city colleges or have gotten full scholarships to go to other colleges, who came to us at 11 to 13 years old in the beginning, who were totally damaged. And now they're reaching for the stars.